All right, well, today we're here to talk about what everybody's talking about, which is inflation. I think we all know by now that inflation is at a 40-year high, and we know why. When the federal government prints trillions of dollars, when they enact irresponsible energy policies, and when you have a fragile global supply chain with inevitable bad actors, the government can only manipulate the market so long before it corrects itself. And Minnesotans are suffering more than most right now. Right now we have the 5th highest tax burden in the nation. Our state budget has grown 75% over the last 12 years, while wages have only grown 25%. And I think if you're a Minnesotan and you don't realize that we are overtaxed, you are the proverbial frog in the boiling pot of water. And what is the return on that investment of Minnesota taxpayers? Well, our crime rate is now higher than the national average. Our schools have been declining for years. And our economy, our state economy, is growing slower than the national average. The tax and spend mentality of our leaders has put us in this hole. They're really good at taxing us, but not so good at spending our money. Feeding our future, a light rail debacle, Minlars, the daycare scandal, a makeshift morgue. It's maddening and embarrassing how much hard-earned money our government has wasted. Scott and I have been all over Minnesota talking to people, and most of them right now they're just trying to survive. And they're nervous. They're nervous because they know that this is not going away anytime soon. And they're also nervous because they don't believe that Tim Walz and Peggy Flanagan can help pull us out of this. And why would they? You don't send arsonists to put out a fire. It's in times like this that it's incumbent on the state government and its leaders to pull all the levers it can to help our citizens, but also address the underlying policy problems. What we're going to propose here today with our FIT plan, these are not just short-term gimmicks. These are long-term, forward-thinking solutions that will not only see Minnesota through the current crisis, but put us on a path to sustainable prosperity. Scott is going to run through the plan, but I hope that you see, that you recognize one main philosophical difference between how Scott and I approach this and how Tim Walz and Peggy Flanagan approach this. And that's that we believe that the government and its leaders are here to serve the people and not the other way around.
I suppose it'd probably be too much to ask, Matt, for the audience to break out into spontaneous applause. Anyway, thanks for being here. Appreciate it very much. I'm just going to run through the plan real quickly. I want to definitely get to the questions because I know that that's heavy on your mind. But I think we have to start with the question that Minnesotans are asking. Am I better off now than I was 4 years ago? I think that is the question. Last night I was meeting with a constituent, and I guess I should say future constituent. But this person said, I literally have to make a decision. Do I use the remainder in my checkbook to go fill up with gas, or do I go to the grocery store? It might seem impossible that this is a conundrum that Minnesotans are in, but it is a very real thing. And yet, on the other hand, when I look at what Governor Walz has proposed, I ask myself, how can he be so out of touch? How can even his colleagues in the Democratic Party be talking about giving back? Those are his words, giving back this overpayment. And then say, but we're going to give it back not to necessarily the people who paid it in. We're going to do the Santa Claus thing. We're going to do it across the spectrum. People that didn't pay a dime of that overpayment are going to be included just as much as anyone else. And people that did pay, and if you will provide that overpayment, many of them will be excluded. And then as a bit of a perk, we're told, but don't worry, this will be treated as a tax credit. You won't have to pay tax on it. Okay, if that's the case, I'd appreciate some documentation that we know that that's true. These are the things that Matt Burke and I want to distinguish ourselves. from Tim Walz and Peggy Flanagan. We want to provide you with a plan that has aspirational components to it and immediate components to it. But to me, when you start talking about checks going to all Minnesotans, even if they didn't contribute to this overpayment, and then put your name on them, this is the height of political vanity and pandering. So let's just run through the plan real quickly. 10 points. We got to fight inflation together. It's the only way we're going to do it. We've got to get proactive on energy. We've got to put in place the gas price reduction plan. But we also need to have a hard conversation. How are we going to provide a complete electric grid? If we really think that solar and wind and throwing out the use of fossil fuels is going to solve the problem, I think we're kidding ourselves. We've got to put nuclear energy on the table, and we got to have that discussion. And we can, and we should. Second, more money in pockets now. We are in the top 10 in virtually every tax category. That is devastating to Minnesota families. Is it devastating to Tim Walz? I'd say this. If you don't pay for automobile registrations, or auto tabs, or gas, or your driver, or your food, or your chef, or your property taxes, or your utilities, I think it's pretty easy to be out of touch. And I think that's what's frustrating a lot of Minnesota families. We need to put more money in the pocketbooks and the checkbooks of everyday Minnesotans now. We have to increase worker pay, and one way to do that is to either eliminate, phase out, or dramatically reduce our personal income tax. I was in the Senate for one term. We never once had a big, robust, hard discussion about what would Minnesota look like if we truly became the economic hub of the Midwest. Why can't we? We used to dream like that. That's why we had a preponderance of Fortune 500 companies in our state, but we're losing them. Have Minnesotans asked themselves what we would look like if we lost Arctic Cat, Polaris, JBS, if we lost Target, if we lost Best Buy? We can't afford to be casual about businesses staying in Minnesota. And I think every Minnesotan can scratch their head over the casual approach toward waste, fraud, and abuse. Matt Burke mentioned the Minlars. He mentioned the daycare. We can talk about the fraudulent feeding programs for the hungry. Did we ever hear anybody called on the carpet? What we've heard regarding the Southwest Light Rail is, oh no, this isn't the building project that's causing these condominiums to crack. I have people reaching out to me saying, I can't even think about selling my condo because nobody wants to buy a flawed structural condo at this point in time, and yet I'm being told that this isn't the product of this building program. Minnesota got into this light rail program in the southwest portion of the Twin Cities because we were told this was a deal that we couldn't pass up. $2 billion and the feds are going to pay $1 billion. Never mind the fact that it cost $150 million to build 1 mile of light rail, and it only cost $5 million to build a 2-way dedicated rapid bus route transit pathway. Never mind that. It was going to be $1 billion for us, $1 billion for the feds. How could we pass it up? Well, you know what? Now it's $3 billion, and the feds aren't paying any more than what they've already said they're going to pay. And my understanding is we haven't received all those dollars yet. And part of the problem about making an accurate assessment of what this project is doing to Minnesota is that we can't necessarily walk away from the project because we may not get the federal dollars and we have to pay them back. Governor Walz should be speaking to this issue. He should be having the MnDOT in front of us. He should be having the Met Council in front. Someone should be called on the carpet. It isn't happening. We have a casual attitude towards abuse of Minnesota taxpayer dollars. We need to veto a wasteful project. Governor Walz is the only governor in Minnesota history to never veto or line item veto any bill or appropriation. That's got to stop. We need to put a sunset on virtually every newly created program. We need to make certain that these programs stand up to the light of day and a very real, transparent examination and decide, should it go forward or not? And if it's doing what we want it to do, then why wouldn't the legislature put it forth to the governor to once again sign and continue its lifetime? But if we don't sunset these projects, we're really not interested in getting rid of the incredible layers of government in Minnesota. Eliminate Social Security taxes. This could have been done. This could have been done in the last legislative session. Governor Walz wouldn't let it happen. Minnesotans have Governor Walz to look at because he wasn't willing to have a single standalone vote on reducing or eliminating Social Security taxes. That's all we needed to do. That could be done. Hire competent watchdogs. I remember way back in the day when I was early in my medical career, there was a group of watchdogs that got involved with PHP. That was critically important because there were insurance companies that were abusing the trust between patients, insurance companies, hospitals, and all the other stakeholders. That watchdog program ended up turning into something that really revolutionized the way we look at insurance plans for health insurance in Minnesota. Watchdogs matter, and we've got to do better. Governor Walz should be calling out, having watchdogs put in place so he can have audits and hold some of his commissioners and their departments accountable. Costly mandates. If we're not willing to fight the mandates that simply jack up the prices across Minnesota, we're not serious about reducing inflation. We have so many regulations and permits that make it so difficult for greater Minnesota daycare providers to work, for so many industries, whether you're talking mining or farming or whatever. And we need to increase job growth. We need to make sure that we can, across the sectors of Minnesota industry, allow, if you will, the wages to grow to what they should and can be. Right now we're saying, well, we're going to get a 4 to 5% increase in the average wage earner's wage. Well, when inflation is over 8%, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that they're not keeping up. So these are things we can do. The details certainly are important to all of you, and they're available on our website. Before I go to questions, I just want to say, I'm not interested in calling any public servants names, and I'm not going to. But I think we need to call out the failures when we see them. I think we saw Governor Walz freeze. He froze when it came time to putting the National Guard on the streets of Minneapolis and St. Paul during the riots. He froze when it came time to protect the 3rd Precinct building. He froze when he said, stand down to the State Patrol, we're going to let the demonstrators tear down Christopher Columbus from his perch, which they had no business doing. And now we're seeing a different tactic. Now we're seeing a flip-flop. We're seeing a man who said, we've got to have an increased gas tax. For 2.5 years plus, he said, this is what we need to do. Now he's saying, we don't need a gas tax. He was saying, we need to increase taxes. Now he's saying, no, we're going to play Santa Claus and we're going to give you a chunk of money back. Our plan would say, let's look hard at the income tax. And let's reduce income taxes in such a way that we can assure virtually every Minnesota family that's paying in taxes will receive somewhere around $4,000 to $5,000 at least. But this would be in a split way. It'd be a hybrid fashion where we may well have an upfront portion. And let me tell you, it would never be called Jensen checks. But it would include some permanent tax reduction as well as potentially a bolus upfront. I think family expenses, whether you're talking about food, fuel, whether even just doing your taxes, the forms weren't even put in compliance by Governor Walz's team. And so now, I had a patient call in the other day and he said, I have no healthcare questions, doc, but I just want to ask you a political question. I said, what's that? He said, I just got notification that I owe $1,400 more because when we completed our taxes, the forms we used weren't available, the correct ones. And so we were given some sort of an 80% credit instead of the 20% we're supposed to get, so now we owe more. I think farmers are frustrated. The cost of fertilizer, the fuel costs, there's no relief there. I think the flip-flopping is horrendous. And I would say this to Minnesota. You have a governor that could have gotten this done, and he didn't. For 5 months, he wasn't talking about doing any kind of a $2,000 rebate. I don't know if you remember when Nancy Pelosi made the comment, you know, what we're talking about here is just throwing $1,000 out to families and it's just crumbs. I think at some level, Minnesotans see through this. They recognize that this is not any kind of a permanent, lasting, thoughtful, measured intervention. This is pandering. Governor Walz is nervous about the election. He knows he's going to be held accountable for inflation. He hasn't put a plan together that even begins to identify with any aspirational or specific detail as we have. And so he's saying, hey, let's forgive and forget. I'll write you a check for $2,000. I'd like your vote in November. I think everybody sees through this. Be glad to stand for questions. Thank you.
Inflation is a national and global problem. I mean, do you think you can do anything more than put a slight dent in what the cost of living is for Minnesotans?
Great question. You know what? I think Minnesotans would appreciate a slight dent in inflation. Can we do as much as we'd like to? Not until we own up to the responsibility we have as leaders. If we think that we can casually make policy decisions that fracture supply chains and get away with it, we're kidding ourselves. If you make it difficult to permit, license, regulate the production of, if you will, oil and gas, you're going to pay a consequence. We've basically become an energy-dependent nation when we used to be energy independent. Do we think this is the good long play to put ourselves, if you will, at the mercy of other countries, that we have to go and say, hey, you know, we want to do this? That's Elizabeth Warren came out and made some comment about the fact that we need to hold petroleum and natural gas producers responsible for what they've done. They pushed back in the Wall Street Journal about 2 weeks ago, and they said, bull roar. They said, you're the one who's doing this. When you make us reduce our production, this doesn't fix the problem. This makes the problem worse. Because everybody's going to get their fuel, whether it's liquid natural gas, whether it's oil, they're going to get it. And if we're producing less, then to get it, you're going to have to pay more. And that's exactly what's happening. That's why gas is going up. If we had pipelines and greater production and we were energy independent, we wouldn't be having this problem. This is a self-induced crisis that we made because leaders didn't take, if you will, adequate measures to make sure that what they were doing, they could see the unintended consequences, they could see the downstream effects. And now we don't have an ability to flip a switch and make everything right again. Next question.
Okay, on your tax cut proposals here, you talked about eliminating the personal income tax. You were here for 4 years. You know that you can't make the budget work with that big of a revenue loss.
And the question within that is what?
Is that realistic? Do you really think that you can eliminate the personal income tax here in the state? And if so, how would you make that up?
When Thomas Edison created the light bulb, his friends told him that's not realistic. I don't know how we can determine if it's realistic if we're not willing to have that big, bold, robust discussion. Let's go back in time. Let's go back to Rudy Purchase in the 1980s. People said to him, is it realistic that you think you can have open enrollment without undercutting our public education system? Rudy Purchase kept pressing on, and he was responsible for two big, bold ideas: post-secondary enrollment options and open enrollment. Is it realistic to talk about eliminating Minnesota personal income tax? I think it's as realistic as inventing a light bulb or a computer in my phone that used to take up a room this size with mainframes. But unless we have that discussion and we say, okay, we're getting $10 to $15 billion per year in personal income tax. We're spending at a rate that's greater than most comparable states. We collect 150% of personal income tax that Wisconsin does, even though we have less people. We've increased our budget from $30 billion in 2010 to $52 billion in 2022, which is a 75% increase. If we can't talk about how does Minnesota look with more responsible spending, and how did some states, literally 1 out of 5 states in this country, survive without a personal income tax, if we can't have that conversation, we're never going to solve the problems with big, bold ideas. So do I think that between creating a sizzling economy where Minnesota becomes an economic hub like people could never have guessed, could that help? Yes. Could dramatically reducing Minnesota expenditures help? Absolutely. Do we have enough waste, fraud, and abuse in our system to make a huge dent? Yes. Can we eliminate it? We'll have to discuss it. Can we phase some brackets out? Yes. We certainly don't need to be thinking about adding additional tax brackets so we can get additional tax dollars. And that's the kind of conversation that Governor Walz has been leading.